The question is that new clause 1 be read a second time, and I call Jim Allister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I will begin by saying that I agree and endorse what the Honourable Member for Stoke-on-Trent Central has said. I think he makes logical and coherent points in that regard, and this is a bill which could be used as a vehicle in that regard, and therefore I would support both his new clause and new clause 4, which is a similar ilk. However, there are aspects of this bill which I think are democratically dangerous, because this bill gives to government unbridled capacity to make by regulation, with virtually no oversight from this elected House, on matters which touch not just upon the sanctity of our product production, but indeed upon the sovereignty of this nation. Because this bill, with very little attempt at subtlety, is a vehicle which enables a government, if so minded, and this one I fear might be, to sabotage Brexit in many ways. This is a government, I stand to be corrected, I don't think there's a single member of this government who voted for Brexit. And yet, that is the settled and declared will by the greatest number ever in a democratic vote in this nation. And yet, within this bill, we have the capacity, particularly through clause 2(7), to align, dynamically align, all our regulations with those of the EU, and to do that without recourse to this House, to do it at the whim of the executive. Now, whatever the subject matter, that surely is a most unhealthy situation.
Will the Honourable Member give way on that point?
Yes.
I think the Honourable Member is making an important point, and it's why I'll be supporting opposition amendments in this vein today. But doesn't he agree with me that those House of Lords reports from the DPRC, Madam Deputy Speaker, are so important in this, because they actually have brought to life just how skeletal this bill is. And isn't it because of that that we should be really paying attention? We shouldn't always have to leave it to the House of Lords to do our work for us, but we should actually be having it here, and these debates about the future should be happening here on the floor of the House, not at ministerial diktat at a later date.
I agree absolutely. And yes, on this bill in particular, the House of Lords has done some very informative and useful work. I only hope it is not wasted on this government, and that is my fear.
Will the Honourable Member?
Yes?
I'm very grateful for your respect. I'm going to agree with him. Has he had time to look at Amendment 13, which would have the effect of bringing any backsliding back to this House for a determination before it was used by the government? Now, I suspect he, like me, wouldn't accuse ministers at the moment of being capable of abusing Henry VIII powers, but some future government might do. And it's really for that reason that we need Amendment 13, particularly to ensure that retained EU legislation, a third of which the previous government got rid of, doesn't start over the years, over the months and years, creeping back, so that we're back where we began prior to 2016 and effectively take the public for fools.
I agree absolutely, and I think no member of this House should glibly pass over clause 2(7) of this bill, because it expressly and emphatically says that regulations which can be made in the manner described without recourse to this House can be made to provide that product regulation is treated if it meets the relevant EU regulation. Now, that is quite a bold, indisputable platform upon which to dynamically realign this United Kingdom in all those regulations with EU regulations, to become rule takers in that regard. And that, I think, is the fundamental objection at the heart of this bill. And in the context of lack of scrutiny, the lack of scrutiny powers of this House in this regard is made worse by the fact that we no longer have the European Scrutiny Committee. If and when we had that committee, we at least had an opportunity. And that is why I do welcome new Clause 15, because new Clause 15 would require the authorities of this House to explore and hopefully ultimately establish a scrutiny committee of the regulations being made. And that surely should be the minimum expectation of anyone democratically elected to this House, that we should have the capacity to give oversight and challenge and scrutiny to laws which were made in the name of those we represent, but made exclusively by the executive without the requisite consent or processes of this House. That seems to me so fundamental that it is a very sad commentary indeed on the intent behind this bill if new Clause 15 is not acceptable to the government. Because if it's not, then it is saying it wants unbridled, unchallenged, unchallengeable power to make whatever regulations it likes, despite and in the face of this House.
Would the honourable member explain? Isn't the government throughout this process with this piece of legislation has said that it's not about the European Union, yet, as the honourable member makes clear, only the European Union can we specifically align with under regulations through this legislation. So doesn't that fundamentally undermine the entire argument made by this government and why these amendments are so vital in order to protect this House?
Absolutely. The government does tell us, when we make trade deals, we need to be able to ensure that we have the requisite alignment. But this bill provides only for alignment with the EU. Rather lets the cat out of the bag. This bill is not about facilitating international trade so that we could, in the relevant circumstances, align with the United States or Japan or whoever we're making deals with. This bill is exclusively, singly focused upon alignment with the EU. And that is because I suspect the purpose of this bill is to advance at the speed that the government wishes, without the restraint of this House, down the road of dynamic alignment. So, to me, new Clause 15 is very important. Amendment 16 is a key amendment here, because it is Amendment 16 which will pull the teeth of Clause 2.7 and protect us from the intended course of action. So I do very strongly support Amendment 16, believing that it really would rein in powers that needed to be reined in and would remove the threat and indeed the allegation that this is about realignment with the EU. A couple of weeks ago, we had the reset, so-called, with the EU. The reset is as nothing compared to this bill. This bill is the legislative vehicle whereby Brexit can be sabotaged. And that is why it is important to address the core issue which lies at Clause 2.7. And if this bill is not about securing dynamic alignment with the EU, then there would be support from the government for Amendment 25, making the reference to foreign law, not to EU law. Exactly. And if it did that, then it would remove from those of us who believe that this is a subterfuge to secure realignment with the EU, it would remove that and put to bed those concerns. But of course the government, I fear, will not accept that amendment. So it is, I do perceive, a Trojan bill, a bill with a very clear direction of travel, and a direction of travel determined to be secured by ignoring the scrutiny powers that this House should have, and by affording to the Executive and the Executive alone the right at the pace and the time and the content that they and they alone approve of to realign us dynamically with the EU. So I do say to this House that the bill needs those radical amendments, that surgery that Amendment 16 would provide, and the very least it requires is the semblance of oversight that new Clause 15 would provide. Thank you very much.